Hey guys, thanks for joining me live today. We're going to be talking about four experiences I had that led me from evangelicalism to ancient Christianity. Thanks for joining me. So, the first experience that I had began in 2007 at the Ancient Faith for the Church's Future conference at Wheaton College. I believe this was the very first one. Hopefully, you can see that on your screen. I still have the booklet from 2007. I want to recount why I was there. First of all, I was a student at Taylor University, big evangelical university in the Midwest, very similar to Wheaton College, where like Billy Graham and Jim Elliot, the missionary, many people went. And I was really in search of, I knew who Jesus was generally, and I knew I wanted to serve him, but I was very much like, what is this thing called the church? What is worship? What is the church? Because, in Protestantism, particularly evangelicalism, there was just a wide array of what was available. And so I was deep in my bones searching for like, what is this thing called the church? And so I was really, of course, I was getting a degree in biblical studies, Christian theology, Christian education, but I was also doing a lot of reading and exploring at that time in Protestantism. There was a particularly evangelicalism, I should say. There was a big sort of push uh, to embrace. There was a camp called post evangelicalism in a sense, but it was still kind of one foot in the camp of evangelicalism. And people were reading authors that were called emergent church authors, like Brian McLaren, Tony Jones. There were several authors. There were a lot of scholarly people too that people were reading, like Dr. Robert Weber, who wrote Ancient Future Faith, which he was based out of Wheaton College. He was actually supposed to be at the conference that I went to, but he was actually passing away while I was there. So he did a lot of scholarly work. Stanley Grins did a lot of work on community and theology in the evangelical community. So, anyways, I was studying a lot of this stuff, and my buddy was like, "Look, Tony Jones is going to be at this Church Fathers conference at Wheaton College, the very first one." Little did we know that it was gonna be, like, a super, scholarly conference that we were not really ready for. I mean, I think he was a freshman undergrad, I was a sophomore. We weren't quite ready for this. I mean, we had read a lot, knew a lot about scripture, and we were just getting our feet wet with, like, early church history. And this was, like, heavy hitters, and this guy who's in the emergent church movement that we were following, Tony Jones, was gonna be a speaker there, but not from the scholarly camp. So there were, like, people showing up like us who showed up there, and then, the rest of the audience was generally pretty scholarly, and we realized quickly, "Oh my goodness, we're, like, really out of our league here." Um, Tony's talk was essentially, I don't wanna say it was laughed at, but it was basically laughed at the conference. Basically, he was arguing, for a postmodern type of theology that had no hermeneutic of, continuity or authority, and he basically was arguing, like, what if orthodoxy was always open, like open source, open theology, open and dynamic, basically fluid. Of course, there's some truth in this, but overall, his whole premise was kind of like where you're getting gender fluid theory today, where you're getting a lot of sort of like, what is a human? He was doing that to like, what is a church? And applying postmodern thought where there were no categories anymore. And that his basically PowerPoint slide was the Holy Spirit's just going to keep us there. We don't need dogmatics. We don't need councils. We don't need any type of authority structure whatsoever. Very similar to maybe like a type of Quakerism, but trying to make it all of evangelicalism and whatever else. That conference was very eye-opening for myself and my friend. We were listening to lots of other talks about the church fathers. Let me just look at this. There was a doctor, Darren Sarinsky from the University of Aberdeen on giving a talk on Saint Basil back in 2007. Um, you'll recognize this name. He's done a lot of work. He was at the conference. Father, well, there was Dr. Christina Pohl. She did a talk on hospitality. Father Brian Daly. Okay, so he's done a lot of work. I reference him a lot on the patristic sort of eschatology, and he's done a lot on Mariology. and he was there. Again, I was not ready for these talks. I left this conference being like, I have a lot to learn about the church fathers. There was a talk on Saint Cyril of Alexandria. There was a talk on Saint John Chrysostom and hospitality. There was a talk on Saint Ignatius of Antioch. All these fathers where I just read like quotes, like my professors would throw quotes in them by in their lectures, but I hadn't really read them first source. Saint Benedict. Um, lots of good stuff in here. But anyways, this conference was big and eye opening for me. Uh, so this is experience one. So I was like, okay, I need to go read the church fathers. But of course, I'm a poor college student, and I should have had this picture ready. But at my university, if you looked at the shelves, um, there were like volumes and volumes and volumes of Martin Luther. And like next to Martin Luther, there were like 2 volumes of Thomas Aquinas. And then next to that, there were like no theologians uh of repute next to all these guys. Now you could find the New Testament, or like sorry, like this the ancient Christian commentary where you could read the whole Bible with all these volumes with the fathers alongside of that, which is good, but it's still not really firsthand because they're being hand selected and like, oh, here's read through the book of Romans and then here's the fathers next to it. Problem is that gets highly edited in the evangelical circles. So I started reading them online, though. This is, 2006, 2007, 2008. The fathers are really beginning to be posted online. And we're now in a very beautiful place, but there's still tons that hasn't been translated today. Um, we need way more. But anyways, back then it was just kind of getting uploaded, and Calvin College posted a lot of their stuff. So I began reading a lot of the fathers online just firsthand. I remember reading St. Ignatius of Antioch 7 Letters. Again, I did a video a while back on Father Andrew Damick's book, Bearing God. I recommend this book. It's a really great introduction to St. Ignatius because he really captures the spirit that he has uh, from his love of Christ and the Eucharist, from just wanting to be a good pastor and lay down his life for his flock, the essence of martyrdom, particularly the spirit of martyrdom in Orthodoxy in the ancient church. Great book. I would highly recommend it. So definitely check that out. So I'm reading the fathers, and I'm like, okay, this is different than what I expected. I'm now beginning to like take these puzzle pieces of the fathers and make sense of the conference that I had just been a part of. There was even a guy there. Oh shoot, Wheaton College professor. Oh, I can't remember his name, but anyways, he was arguing for like a type of like Protestant magisterium, or like a type of college of evangelical leaders that could sort of guide the teaching of the church and all that. And that was a very fascinating talk that I just had no idea I didn't even know he was talking about half the time. Of course, getting into the fathers, and then eventually, okay, what are the ecumenical councils? What are the creeds? What are the ancient churches still around today? That was beginning to sort of piece all these things together. So, experience two was getting to read the fathers firsthand. I began in my theology papers integrating the fathers, like Saint John Chrysostom. I wrote a whole book or paper on his theology of hospitality and integrated that with Third John for my senior paper. And I remember being like, Saint John Chrysostom, the golden mouth preacher, he's amazing. He's like he's the best preacher maybe of all time, but definitely the best preacher in the ancient church. I'm like, what kind of church produced this kind of guy? Who produced Saint John? And you begin reading the firsthand accounts from the fathers, and you read their biographies, the biographies of the fathers, the saints. And what happens is, and this is dangerous, you begin to fall in love with them. You begin to fall in love with the fathers. So it's not just reading them, it's not just a history lesson at that point. It's like, oh, this is my family tree. I always challenge people like my Protestant brothers and sisters in Christ to, when maybe they're not interested in reading the fathers or just kind of writing them off quickly. I'm like, well, why don't you just maybe you're interested in like at least discovering your family tree, right? You may not always agree with them, you may not always like them, but they're a part of like the Christian family. And if you read it, it's like at least the majority, or super majority. So that's kind of how I get people to start kind of looking at them. Hey, this is your family tree. Don't you want to get to know them a little bit? So that's That's my falling in love with the fathers. Third experience. The third experience is I had to sort of be unhooked from Calvinism. Now, I didn't grow up Calvinist. I grew up Southern Baptist. I grew up Arminian. Uh, I did not grow up Calvinist, but around 19, 20, at the age of around 18 or 19, because I was so ahistorical with my theology. All I knew were like I knew the great awakenings and the great sort of revivalist preachers of American history. Um, but I didn't know church history all that well. And so I fell in love back when I was 18 and 19 with the Reformation, and like, okay, I need some kind of grounding for doctrine. So you start looking at, John Calvin and Luther, and the list goes on. And I was really into like R.C. Sproul, um, and many others. But anyways, I was going down this Reformed Calvinist, road. And really, by 20, I was like, I am a Calvinist, and I would argue with my Methodist friend who was the son of a Methodist pastor. We'd go back and forth quite a bit, and he was very high. He was much more high church than I was, and I was much more low church. He was arguing even for a type of vestment, and I was arguing for pastors that preach in their t-shirts and jeans, which is what I was planning on being when I graduated and got into church planting and all that. But we get in these arguments. But I was like this Calvinist, and it really required. I had three different big thinkers. There were many, but that kind of unhooked me from Calvinism. The first was Dr. Larry Hellier, who was a professor of mine on Second Temple period Judaism. Wrote a great book. I don't own the book. I remember that I rented it a lot from the library, and but I wish I still had that book. Second Temple period Judaism. He helped unhook me from. He had a whole section on reading Romans chapter 9 within the framework of Second Temple period Judaism. Then I also was really into Dr. Ben Witherington, and if you watch this channel a lot, you notice these volumes. Some of these are Dr. Ben Witherington's books. Okay, he's a Wesleyan Methodist scholar, and he's kind of church fathers friendly. He introduced me to even the books, like the Book of Wisdom. He talks about the Book of Wisdom a lot in his New Testament sort of studies. He's written a book on every book in the New Testament, and I even uh, called myself a disciple of Dr. Ben Witherington and Dr. N.T. Wright. And I even said that to Scott Hahn in a conversation. I'm like, I'm kind of like, I was like a disciple of Witherington and Wright, these two great New Testament scholars. And so I was really into N.T. Wright as well, who was also part of this emergent church movement that I talked about in the first experience. N.T. Wright was kind of beloved in that community, but he was much more grounded because he was Anglican. He had a sacramental theology, biblical, patristic to a certain extent. So he was, out of all the emergent guys, he was kind of like the well-grounded scholarly bishop. And so I went to a talk at Asbury College. This was also in 2007. So my first experience was in the spring of 2007. Then in the fall of 2007, I went to Asbury Seminary and saw a talk by N.T. Wright. And Dr. Ben Witherington gave the opening talk, introducing his friend. Right. So these two guys unhooked me from Calvinism, and they led me to a deeper understanding of apostolic Christianity. Now, I would say, of course, it's incomplete with those two guys, but they helped me see how the New Testament merged with an understanding of soteriology, an understanding of salvation, and even ecclesiology. I mean, both Witherington and Wright were in a church with, bishops with a threefold office: bishops, presbyters, and deacons. Though they work those out differently. Neither of them, I think, believe actually in apostolic succession, but they were sort of my inroads to sort of sacramental thinking into those things. I think that Wright and Witherington may have a similar view of like as Dr. Gavin Ortlund, where, or at least he talked about in his most recent stream on gospel simplicity, that they view bishops more for the well-being of the church, but not the being of the church. And you get into apostolic Christianity, and no, bishops are very much part of the framework that Christ gave. Of course, there's a long conversation about how the apostles handed it on and how all that developed, but really that was all an interesting conversation. So it led me. Witherington and Wright helped unhinge me from Calvinism, into a deeper form of sacramental thinking. Um, which then, of course, I graduated college, got into church planting. I was part of a church planting network, um, and then I took all of this sort of journey to kind of realizing, um, as a church planter and an aspiring pastor, that I got to this point where I realized I can't build this on my own. This was a huge moment. This is the fourth experience. Okay, I can't reconstruct the ancient church in the modern era. That's what all my emergent guys were doing, right? Brian McLaren. Okay. Uh, I was reading, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Life Together, which he was an emergent guy. He's obviously was killed in World War II. Brennan Manning, um, Richard Foster, Rob Bell. I could throw you like lots of books, but I thought, oh, maybe I can take all these fathers and reconstruct something. Um, and I got to this moment where I realized I don't think I can do this because the fathers don't talk like this. They are respecting that which was handed on, like the original thing, as if it was a carefully guarded message. And of course, there's authority structures built into this, an authority structure of service and humility, but one of ordination. I never could fully make sense of ordination apart from apostolic succession. I mean, you can, but apostolic succession, where the authority from the apostles to the bishops are clearly manifested in St. Ignatius of Antioch, son of the disciples. And it makes great sense of ordination. And it gives you a lofty high view of it, right? I started reading a book called The Lost History of Christianity, and it kind of sounds like a weird, like Gnostic book that you'd find on like, the New York Times bestsellers list. And it wasn't. It's scholarly work by Philip Jenkins. Okay. Which I think he grew up Catholic, became Anglican, but he really doesn't put his personal stuff in there. This is just like his historical investigations. Okay. Um, and The Lost History of Christianity was published in 2008. So again, this is the 2007. All these experiences are 2006, 7, 8 timeline. And he introduces me to apostolic churches. These are ancient apostolic churches, some that died, like not the whole thing, but like, parts of the world. Um, and he talks about how the ancient church would go to these areas and they could either thrive or they could die for various reasons. So he's just kind of describing these global patterns. And you realize, oh, the church was global very early on. It wasn't just European, it was massive all the way from Antioch all the way through like Iraq to India. It was down from Alexandria down to Ethiopia, of course, all the way to Spain, but even upward, it was moving. And so you have this global Christianity. Okay. And this book was very helpful in sort of helping me realize, oh, I don't have to rebuild this. There's like ancient churches that still exist. Like there'd be missionaries that go to Iraq during when George W. Bush, the president, at the invasion of Iraq, there were a lot of like evangelical missionaries that went in after the invasion of Iraq or the and getting rid of Saddam Hussein. There were a lot of evangelical missionaries that went in there like, oh, let's share the gospel with all these Muslims, and they started hitting these villages that were like Christians, and these people in these villages were like, yeah, we're Christians, and the evangelical missionaries were like, well, when did you become a Christian? And they were like, well, the Saint Thomas the Apostle came and shared the gospel with us in our village. Uh, and and there's a monastery in Iraq that like still has the hand of Saint Thomas. I think it's called Saint Matthew uh, Monastery. Unfortunately, when ISIS rolled through decade ago, they destroyed a lot of this kind of ancient Christian landscape up in Nineveh Plains. All this to be said, this was eye-opening for me as someone who grew up evangelical, that apostolic Christianity was global and multi-rite and looked differently than what I grew up with, but looked like what the fathers passed on. And so there was a point where I realized I am not going to recreate this on my own. And that was a hard moment because I thought I could. It's like, oh, maybe I could do some kind of like Anglican evangelical hybrid. Uh, Maybe I could find apostolic succession from someplace. Maybe find some kind of old Catholic guy, um, or some Anglican orders that you can find that have their connections to the apostles. But in the end, I realized no, I need to be a part of one of these ancient apostolic churches. And this was around 2009, 10, getting started with church planting. Um, and I realized, oh my goodness, oh my goodness, I need to help lead people, and if they don't come, then I have to go. I have to lead people to ancient apostolic Christianity. Now, back then, there wasn't a lot of Orthodox stuff. Okay, now this whole stream is not about Orthodoxy versus Catholicism or Coptic Oriental uh, Orthodoxy and Christianity, or even the Assyrian Church of the East, which this book actually referenced quite a bit. I'd never even heard of the Church of the East. But I'm just giving you a part of my story, and I'll have a part 2 where I talk about my journey through Roman Catholicism to Holy Orthodoxy. Um, for many that follow this channel, I taught Catholic high school theology, worked for a Catholic parish for several years, and on a journey of becoming Orthodox. And really, when I became Catholic back in 2012, I never condemned orthodoxy whatsoever. Completely a live option. It was always a live option. But again, that's part 2, which will be coming down the road, but, that'll slowly be coming out, okay? Um, Somebody put, "Oh, Assyrian Church of the East." Yes, those are two different histories. Actually, they were quite reactive to each other. Oriental Orthodox and reacting to, what we call Nestorians or Assyrian Church of the East. Again, all those are long conversations revolving around Christology. That's not what this stream's about. We can talk about that some other time. I've had people ask me, "Oh, why didn't you become Coptic Orthodox?" Or "Why didn't you do this or that?" I actually seriously thought about all those things. Shoot, I even thought about driving up to Chicago to become part of the Church of the East way back then. Like, oh, there's a big church up there. I was like, whatever, Lord, is the option that you gave, that is, here I am, Lord, even if it's super hard. But anyways, I'm just telling you my story from evangelicalism to that doorstep of, oh, ancient apostolic Christianity. What is this thing? And that was starting to feel like a long time ago now. That was back in 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and here I am today. But I'm here because I get a lot of people who are Protestants, um, whether they might be evangelical or Anglican, and they message me, they call me, they leave comments, emails, all sorts of ways, and they're really waking up to this reality that they cannot create this thing on their own. That what Christ handed on is still out there, and they have a part of it, but not all of it. They love Jesus. I always say that the three big pillars of evangelicalism, which are beautiful, by the way, um, are um, Bible study, with like sound preaching, um, having a personal relationship with Jesus, and like sharing your faith. Okay, so like Bible study slash preaching, sharing your faith, and having a personal relationship with Jesus. I kind of consider those like the three pillars of evangelicalism, and those are pretty powerful pillars, right? Like if you don't know, Saint Jerome said, if you don't know the scriptures, you don't know Christ. So that's pretty important. Number 2, sharing your faith, like having a holy, desire for other people to be, like, saved and being like, and will be, that they will find salvation when Christ returns or at death, like, that should be it's a very selfless desire if you have that desire. It's a very selfless desire. And of course, there's distortions of that, but a pure desire just wants everyone to be saved, to be a part of Christ's church. And then thirdly, to have a personal relationship with Jesus. You don't want to just like um a personal relationship with Jesus means like, I mean, I think the Jesus prayer really really embodies this, right? To have the living presence of Christ always near you and in you. Um, he's always present. And so that saying the Jesus prayer constantly, not as a rote prayer, not an empty ritual, but invoking his name, like it says in the book of Acts, invoking his name and always feeling a connection to his presence, a personal relationship. That's very, very important. So those three pillars of evangelicalism are amazing. And I truly believe that like holy orthodoxy completes all that. And so, prayers for you though, for those who are seeking it all out. I know that you may have a lot of big like theological questions, but continue to pray. Contact an Orthodox priest, visit some Orthodox parishes, um, and I'll be praying for your journey. But this is a part of mine, and I'm happy to share it with you. Got somebody on here. I'm inquiring. I'm currently Catholic. Prayers for you. Um, Somebody asked me the question. Let me show this here for you for those who are watching. Did information about Second Temple period Judaism influence your journey at all? I'm seeing the connections. Yes, for sure. And even more so, I mean, um, I studied a lot of eschatology the last 15 years, particularly the last decade, but really like, the study of the invisible world, the hidden world. And and so Second Temple period Judaism is helpful with that. Um there's many facets there. I think I had Sarah from Hamilton on when we talked about the work of Dr. Michael Heiser, who his large focus isn't on Second Temple period Judaism. It's like kind of before that, but it all relates. Which is why like First Enoch falls under the umbrella of Second Temple period Judaism. How we interpret a lot of texts are helpful when we have an awareness of Second Temple period Judaism. It's not the end all be all, but understanding the history behind reading the Bible, wow, pretty important when we have big questions about what does it mean. Um, so yeah, and when you study the church fathers, you do see these profound connections. Um, you find these profound connections um, with Second Temple period Judaism and the fathers. Somebody asks, were you guided by your role as a religious educator? Um, yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, when you teach theology every day, if you want to do it right, then teaching is the highest form of learning. And so, whenever you teach, I always would recall the book of James, which says, teachers are going to be held to a higher standard, even for laity. Right? I'm teaching uh 14-year-olds all the way up to 18-year-olds daily in high school theology. I'm giving talks to adults in parishes, both, like retreat talks or leading small groups, um, or a number of things, leading a study with the parish group, our staff, uh, under the authority of my priest, helping us sort of see what is this whole thing about. When you're a teacher of the faith, yeah, you take it seriously. You're like, "Oh my goodness, I can never teach anything that I don't think is true dogmatically," So, dogmatics become increasingly more important, um, when you're teaching because you don't wanna of course, you're gonna say some things wrong sometimes, um, and you're gonna get into the realm of theological opinion, theological speculation. But when you're into the high level of dogmatics, which are irreformable and infallible, you really need to believe those. Um So, yes. Somebody was asking questions about the synagogue worship and temple worship, prayer and fasting practices still being practiced in Orthodox Christianity. Yeah, sure. I mean, when you read the Didache, which again, back to my first experience, right? It talks about fasting Wednesdays and Fridays. The East and the West fasted on Wednesdays and Fridays. Sometimes the West would fast also on Saturdays. If anything, the West was more accused of fasting too much, and the East didn't like them fasting on Saturdays. But the West used to fast too much. Then it stopped basically fasting altogether after Vatican II. Now there's a resurgence of through Exodus 90. I've got some friends that work there, but there is a little bit of work going on there where people are fasting. I've got good friends who are fasting again. But yeah, there is a continuity between fasting Mondays and Wednesdays. You see that in the first century and on, of course. Jesus said, "When you fast," there was fasting in Judaism. Um, and fasting isn't just spontaneous. There can be a liturgical calendar and rhythm, and that's not bad. Um, there's a big stereotype that everything in the first century was just like house churches with people singing "Kumbaya" in their living rooms. But when you see Saint Peter's house, look it up in Capernaum. In the first century, of course, it evolved and developed in the first, second, third, fourth century. It kept adding layers, but even in the first century, archaeologists have discovered that there was a set apart, sanctified room in this house complex called St. Peter's House in Capernaum. And what they found was there wasn't domestic items in this room. It was set apart. They found oil lamps and jars, but nothing related to like cooking or like hanging out or doing your normal domestic duties that you would have in your home. No, this was like an add-on chapel that was considered sacred, sanctified space in the first century. So when we say, "Oh, there was house churches with," I'm not saying that they were just hanging out with their guitars with the bonfire. All that's really fun, by the way. Um, but there is in evangelicalism, there is this like take that the first century church was anti-liturgical, anti-creedal, hanging out in your house churches, anti-priesthood, anti-establishment, and all of that I think is just wrong. I don't think that's true. Of course, there are like layers being added throughout the centuries, but the basic principles are essentially like there. Um, so that's that's my take on that. Yeah, I don't have a moderator in the chat, so people are getting all like crazy. Um, so people are trying to sell things and do whatever. But anyways, great for you all joining me today. So glad you guys could help me. Throw out any other questions that you might have. Somebody says thank you for sharing part of your story, uh, so people can benefit on what the journey was. Somebody asked me the question: How big was C.S. Lewis's influence on you in your change from Protestantism to Roman Catholic, and then influence to Orthodox Catholic? Well, Lewis is an interesting figure, and of course, you guys know I talk a lot about Lewis and Tolkien on this channel. Um, and part of my journey does relate to this. Like, my best friend became president of the C.S. Lewis Society at Oxford in 2009 or 10. Part of the Blackfriars, the Dominicans, and he got to know a ton of people who were formerly evangelicals or formerly uh, Anglicans who had become Catholic or Orthodox. Many of them had become Catholic. So you'd find like a lot of Lewis people who think, yeah, Lewis would be this or that because Anglicanism is a mess. And so there's a big debate about that under the whole Lewis conversation. There's a question about what Lewis would actually do. Um, there are hard comments about what Lewis said. Uh, he did say a comment like, for example, he could never really sign off on the Roman Catholic sort of paradigm because you're signing off on something that hasn't like statements that haven't been said yet that could become infallible. Now, I mean, that can be true to a certain extent in Orthodoxy too, right? But not really in the same degree. That's a whole nother type of conversation. Um, but Lewis was uncomfortable uh signing off on all that. So I'm not gonna get into like what would Lewis do because I don't really know what he would do today. I will say this that I do think that orthodoxy would be a beautiful place for Tolkien and Lewis, who were dear friends, to have received communion together and to be in full communion. I think orthodoxy would have been a beautiful place for Tolkien and Lewis to have been together as Christians. But it really wasn't all that readily available in England yet. But you do see it really beginning, like in England and Orthodoxy, Australia, and these places, um, in that sort of Anglo world or whatever. Orthodoxy is beginning to make these inroads. So I just don't think it was all that much of a live, uh, option for him at the time. So you see English people today, Anglicans who are becoming both, Catholic or Orthodox from Anglicanism. So, sure Lewis would have probably fell along those lines somehow, but I don't really know. I will say that Lewis's understanding of the intermediate state, I do think, this could be a whole other stream and conversation, but I do think that Lewis's take on the afterlife and praying for those who have died tends to have more in common with an Orthodox instinct than what developed in Roman Catholicism. Now, I know people are gonna disagree with that, but that's okay. Um, I'm not the only one that said that. I had an interview with, Further Up and Further In. Um, where's that book? In my office. It's gone. With Dr. Edith Humphrey. And, she said that Lewis's instincts about the afterlife seemed to be much more in line with orthodoxy, and I would agree with after studying it for, like, a decade. I think that's true. So maybe I'll get to do, like, a course kind of comparing Orthodox eschatology and the intermediate state in particular with Lewis's great divorce and understanding, you know? Maybe not a perfect harmony, but some very interesting connections. Um, People asking more questions. Given the option, would you like to go Western Rite or would you prefer the Divine Liturgy of St. John? Uh, Chrysostom. You guys know that I'm friends with Father Patrick Cardine. I mean, I post his sermons on my channel. I've been to St. Patrick's in Virginia, visited there a couple times. Beautiful experience, beautiful community. I love the liturgy of St. Gregory the Great. Um, I think it's a shame that it was completely overhauled in the Catholic Church. It's beautiful to see it preserved. Um, I know it can be a bit of a controversial topic in Orthodoxy itself, but I find it beautiful. Yeah, and I also love the liturgy of Saint John Chrysostom. Um, and so for me, I tend to be much more uh, a person who I love my family tree. I love the fathers, and I love these ancient liturgies. The liturgy of Saint John Chrysostom, Saint Basil, Saint James, all part of that family. The liturgy of Saint Gregory the Great, and what came before that in the Roman Rite. Um, so yeah, I do have a deep love of um, the Greek, Latin, Syriac theological traditions, but my decision to become Orthodox is related to dogma, of course, practice too. Like, I love Jesus. The orthopraxy is humongous, but avoiding dogmatic error, I think, is a big part of that conversation. But again, that'll have to be another video for another day. Any other questions? Let's see here. Again, I'm not answering all questions. Maybe we'll do that down the road. Do you have any words of encouragement to those of us who are leaving Protestantism and coming into Orthodoxy? We'll be patient and pray a lot and make lots of friends. 'Cause, Um, read the fathers, read the saints, find good guidance from your spiritual father. Um, and of course, there's many layers to all of this. Patience, though, is one of the hardest, and it's the fruit of the Holy Spirit. So if the Holy Spirit's guiding you to leave Protestantism into apostolic Christianity, be patient. Particularly evangelicalism. There's this great book that I'm reading, and he's going to be on my show called The Ethics of Beauty. And this book is like 700, 800 pages of beauty. Ethics of beauty. But anyways, he makes this wonderful comment. Oh, I can't even remember what section it's on, but about the liturgy. And this is one of the hardest things for evangelicals and even some high Anglican, high Protestants. But he compares the differences between like a passion play and the liturgy. A passion play, what you go see once a year, seeing Jesus crucified, and it's got an orchestra, and it's really taking you through like an emotional roller coaster. That's what a passion play is. And evangelical services on Sundays are meant to take you through an emotional roller coaster. Okay. Of course, I hope that you're having a meaningful experience with Jesus, of course, praying to him, loving him, committing yourself to him. But the service itself is designed, and I even have lots of friends who have formed background of being in, on the stage, playing the drums, the guitar, whatever. Even the pastors who are like, yeah, we would do things to manipulate emotions or play on your emotions, and it's meant to take you through an emotional roller coaster. Even have friends after their Protestant evangelical service where they come out home and they're like, is just completely wiped out and exhausted emotionally. Orthodoxy is not like that. And this is what this book makes a good point of. Orthodoxy, which to our modern American experiences can feel like, oh, this is boring. Oh, why don't we shorten this? Why don't we add this or that to the liturgy? And it's like, no, the liturgy, as he says, is meant to transfigure our emotions. Okay? Different comparison. Emotional roller coaster, exhausted at the end. Versus you attend the divine liturgy and other divine services for years, and you come out with your emotions and feelings and affections transfigured. And the fruit of the Holy Spirit comes as a benefit of that. And it can be hard. I've got 6 kids and one on the way. Taking kids to divine liturgy is difficult. But I also did it with, I also they have no, by the way, my kids have no experience of evangelicalism. Uh, they've only been to mass. So they were already a little bit of a tune. They were already a little bit tuned into what the nature of liturgy is to a certain extent. But the divine liturgy, of course, is longer. It plays on your emotions. I have to be careful about how I say certain things. It transfigures your emotions, so it's not like your emotions don't matter. Um, I mean, I've teared up in the divine liturgy. Um, I've had deeply emotional experiences in the divine liturgy, in the services. But this emotion is transfigured. It's different. Um, and so people can have a very hard time. Of course, it can be just a little disorienting. Oh, I don't know what's going on right now. Um, and so people need a few years to really get that rhythm to be have to develop and have a liturgical mind formed. So that's my advice for evangelicals: be patient, let the liturgy wash over you, and you might find yourself coming out a different person. Um, but it takes patience and a lot of prayer. Find friends, because deep friends can help anchor you. So, and I know orthodoxy for many people can be a bit of a drive, um, where you might have to drive an hour or two to get to an Orthodox church. For other people, it might be close, in your city. But and they're quickly coming. It used to be that you had to drive 3, 4, 5, 6 hours to get to one, and now they're coming in. So if, whenever you're tempted to complain about the distance, realize that God is, if you're coming into Orthodoxy or already Orthodox, God's using you to spread His church in the United States or whatever country you might live in. I always default to the United States, but realizing that people watching this channel are coming from all over the place. Yeah, so God might use a group of people, the guidance of His church, to start a church closer to you. Maybe it's a half hour away, 45 minutes, 20 minutes, maybe where you are. Um, so that should be a part of our prayer list every day. Um, yeah, somebody said ortho. Let's see if it shows up here. Orthopraxy is lived theology. That's right. Orthopraxy is one of the things that deeply impacted me for sure. Um, the Orthodox taught me how to fast. The Orthodox taught me what liturgy was supposed to be. Like, liturgy embeds our theology. Like, our theology is found in the liturgical life, which is why it's a big deal when you get rid of it. You overhaul the liturgical life. For example, I had never even heard I barely heard of Saint Thecla. And Saint Thecla was removed from the calendar, the Roman Catholic calendar, in the 1960s, basically suppressed because they weren't sure if she existed or not. Dr. Stephen Shoemaker, a scholar of the ancient church, said that Saint Thecla was, after the Holy Theotokos, Mary, the number 2 venerated lady in the ancient church. And Saint Thecla always had a major place in the liturgical life of the church, um, in our spirituality of remembering who she is, asking for her prayers. She was a disciple of Saint Paul. And we don't hear in the Roman Catholic Church, we really don't hear much about her because she was removed from the calendar. Really, I mean, I think maybe she's just starting to be talked about again, but that's a big deal when you just do a massive overhaul and just suppress certain saints like Saint Thecla. Um, and so whenever I see like an icon of Saint Thecla or something named after her, I always have like a little smile because I remember discovering her a few years ago. Uh, Under Dr. Stephen Shoemaker's work. I had to read scholarly articles about our Mother Mary to discover Saint Thecla. Not to say I'd never heard of her, but never really knew how significant she was in the ancient church. So it's important. Um, doesn't mean that liturgy isn't cultivated, isn't developed over time, but it's there to help us remember our theology and our saints and all so many things. And so Orthodoxy takes that quite seriously. And that doesn't mean that certain Catholics don't. But you realize in overhauling liturgy, what kind of problems, uh, and also this was the same time in the 1960s and 70s when the fasting was completely overhauled, although it was a slow progression century after century, and all those things. So that's a big deal. Okay. I don't know if I see any um, other big questions here. All right, guys, thanks for joining me. Have a great day, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Barrel Age Faith. Talk a lot about C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, but also the church fathers, a lot of times together. Uh, Also, we'll talk about different subjects related to ancient Christianity and liturgy and my own story. So feel free to like and subscribe on sub. You can find me on Substack at barrelagefaith.com. I give a lot of free things away, but this thing can't exist without my paid supporters who are given $5 a month. So if you want to hop on and you found this to be helpful, yeah, throw in $5 a month. You also get some exclusive content, um, more of which is coming down the road. Uh, kind of like this, but more presentation based. So thanks for joining me, guys. Have an amazing day.